Maybe the most well-known Japanese long-range bomber of World War II, it was developed to unprecedented specifications in the program launched by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. And it was one of these planes that transported him when Allied fighters shot them down, causing his death a few years later. Today we will take a look at the Mitsubishi G4M Type 1 Betty bombers. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, the Japanese aviation industry was lagging behind the more technologically advanced nations. The lack of industrial expertise, trained engineers, and powerful engines restricted their designs. Still, the Japanese Imperial Navy was looking at the air service when they were searching for a way to compensate for the tonnage limit introduced in the Washington Treaty for their naval vessels. The main advocate for these plans was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, whose plan was to develop land-based bomber aircraft with very long range, which can attack enemy naval powers far away from the Japanese mainland, complementing the Navy's surface units. His choice for this project was the Mitsubishi company, because they were working closely with Junkers in Germany, and acquired many of their licenses, and sent their engineers to Germany to learn about the latest technologies. Yamamoto assigned the project to the company, and Mitsubishi poured all their expertise in the design and used their finest engineers, sensing an opportunity to gain substantial future orders. The aircraft developed from this project was the Mitsubishi G4M Nell bomber, an impressive aircraft with almost 4,400 km of range and a maximum speed of 370 km an hour. I have already made a video about the G4M bombers, so if you're interested in their history, check it out. But only a few months after the bombers entered service in 1937, the Navy already issued specifications for their successor. The specifications again were sent to Mitsubishi for the Junichi land-based attack aircraft, and they stated unprecedented numbers. The requested maximum speed was 215 knots, or 247 miles an hour, at 3,000 meters, or 10,000 feet. The range had to be 2,600 nautical miles, or 2,993 miles, with the same payload as its predecessor, meaning 800 kilograms of bomb load. The Navy was not interested in technical challenges, just performance. They basically asked Mitsubishi to create a bomber with the same payload and similar twin engines as its predecessor, but it had to have 30 miles an hour higher maximum speed and 500 miles longer range. The logical choice to lead the development was Kiro Honjo, the same man who designed the G4M bomber. He and his team at first proposed a 4-engine configuration to the Navy, but this plan was quickly shut down, and Honjo was plainly told that the Navy decides what they need, and they should just create the requested aircraft according to the specifications. The main reason for this quick dismissal was actually because the Navy Technical Division already approached the Nakajima Corporation to develop the next attack aircraft, a 4-engine design. For this project, the purchase of a Douglas DC-4 plane was arranged, to serve as the base for the 4-engine bomber design. But the end result, the G5N Shenzhen, in the end turned out to be a failure. Back at Mitsubishi, the design team struggled to make the design fit all the Navy specifications. The speed and range requirements, combined with the twin-engine configuration, proved to be very challenging, as almost 5,000 liters of fuel had to be crammed in the bomber, which unlike its predecessor, carried its bomb load internally as well, not to mention the requested heavier armament, including a 20mm cannon in the tail. The use of self-sealing fuel tanks would have reduced the fuel capacity, but the Navy had none of that. They stick to their specifications. But when Honjo suggested to replace the originally planned 1000 horsepower Kinsei engines with the newly developed 1530 horsepower Kasei ones, the Navy happily accepted, as the performance upgrade was a welcome benefit. The lack of armor plating and self-sealing fuel tanks, however, made the new design vulnerable to enemy fire. And although this was not apparent in their first combat missions over China, where they only faced the weaker Chinese Air Force, but later became painfully obvious, and these planes received nicknames from the Allied pilots as Flying Zippos or Flying Cigars, because they usually caught fire after a few shots in their fuel tanks. The first prototype of the new aircraft made its maiden flight in October 1939, and only slight stability issues were found, which were addressed on the second prototype, which started test flights in February 1940, featuring larger vertical tail and balancing tabs. The prototype showed excellent performance, and with a speed of 240 knots and a range of 3,000 nautical miles, they exceeded the Navy requirements. But before they could enter large-scale production, the events in China brought up some new needs from the Navy. The Japanese bombing raids deep into China were usually beyond the range of the escort fighters, and the exposed G4M bomber formations suffered considerable losses. Some of the officers argued that phasing out the G4M to start production of the new bomber would reduce the number of the available bombers, and what they need is an escort fighter. So when they saw the excellent performance of the new aircraft, they came up with the idea to create a gunship version, adding extra protection and additional two 20mm cannons in a belly blister. Despite the opposition from Mitsubishi, the decision was made to build 30 from this modified version, which was referred as Wingtip Escort. They received an official designation of G6M1. But the modified version was a failure, as later the American side learned as well, with the similar concept XB-40 and 41 modifications. The heavy gunships were too slow to keep up with the bombers after those dropped their payload. The gunship project was a failure, and it delayed the introduction of the new bomber by almost a year, as the first production G4M1 was only completed later in December 1940. Though the production aircraft became heavier than the prototype, it still exceeded the original specifications, and could reach a maximum speed of 231 knots and a range of over 2,300 nautical miles. Finally, after operational trials, it was accepted to service in April 1941 as Type 1 land-based attack aircraft Model 11. The first ones to see action were the failed G6M1 gunship versions, which featured the 1,530 horsepower Kinsei engines, protection for the fuel tanks, unlike the bomber versions, and additional two 20mm cannons on the belly blister. The G4M1 Model 11 was the first bomber version to enter service. They featured the same engines as the G6M1 variant, but later they received the newer Kasei 15 engines, with larger superchargers for better high-altitude performance. 1,172 units were produced. The G4M2 version was introduced in December 1942, and it featured many upgrades compared to the former variant. It featured new Kasei Model 21 engines in new engine nacelles, rated at 1,850 horsepower. A new powered dorsal turret housing a 20mm cannon, and completely redesigned laminar flow wings with rounded tips. The nose glazing was also redesigned, and the waist gunner positions were changed to flat window panels. During production, several different defensive armament configurations were used on different variants, like longer barreled 20mm cannon in the dorsal turret, 20mm cannons in the waist gunner positions instead of the 7.7mm machine guns, or a 13.2mm machine gun in the nose cone. 1,142 units were built from the G4M2 version. The G4M3 variant was the last production model, and only entered production in October 1944. At that time the range was not so crucial, so these models received self-sealing fuel tanks, improved armor protection and armament. Some models featured 4 20mm cannons in the tail, dorsal turret and waist gunner positions, which was very dangerous to any fighter plane. The failing Japanese industry and the air raids hampered its production, and from the G4M3 variant only some 90 units were built. The G4M bomber was 19.97 meters long, with a wingspan of 24.89 meters. It had an empty weight of 6,741 kilograms, and a maximum takeoff weight of 12,860 kilograms. It was powered by two Mitsubishi Kasei 11 engines, developing 1,530 horsepower each. With the help of these engines, it could reach a maximum speed of 428 km an hour and a cruise speed of 315 km an hour. It had a service ceiling of 8,950 meters and a range of 2,850 km fully loaded or more than 5,000 km empty. Its armament consisted of one 20mm cannon in the tail and four 7.7mm machine guns in the nose, top position and waist gunner positions. It could carry 800 kilograms of bombs or one torpedo. Later modified versions were able to carry the Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka suicide rocket. I have already made a separate video on the Yokosuka MXY-7, so if you're interested in the history of that, check it out. The G4M was first used over mainland China in mid-1941. They flew their first combat sorties at the end of July against targets in Chengdu, but they were not just used as bombers. Their other use was quite different. The Japanese fighters usually had a hard time dealing with the Chinese ones, as they only attacked the bomber formations if they didn't have fighter cover. The attacks on the Chinese airfields were also difficult, as to be able to catch the Chinese fighters on the ground, the Japanese had to attack at dawn, but their fighter pilots couldn't navigate the long distances at night. So the fast G4Ms came in handy, as with their 170 knots cruise speed, they could fly in formation with the fighters and served as navigation model ships for the attacks. By September 1941, the Japanese Navy's bombers were withdrawn from China. With most of the carriers deployed to the east and the army only having short-range bombers, the support of the southern operations was left to the Navy's long-range land-based bombers. On 8th of December, flying from Formosa, they bombed the US Army airfields on the Philippines, which signaled the beginning of the Japanese invasion on the southern Pacific. 2 days later, on 10th of December, a combined force of G3M bombers and G4Ms carrying torpedoes attacked two British ships, the HMS Repulse and the HMS Prince of Wales. While the G3Ms dropped bombs on the ships from high altitude, the G4Ms attacked them with their torpedoes and managed to sink both of them. These were the first two capital ships that were sunk solely by air attacks, and it was a big blow to the British power in the area. In February 1942, using their long range, they participated in the attack against Darwin in Australia, taking off from Kendari and flying 1,300 kilometers to bomb the port city. They also attacked land targets and ships at Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands during 1942, but they suffered significant losses as well. As the American early warning system and anti-aircraft fire became more sophisticated, their losses started to mount, as without self-sealing fuel tanks, the planes were very vulnerable to enemy fire, especially during their torpedo runs. Maybe the most well-known incident involving the G4Ms happened in April 1943, when American intelligence managed to intercept messages about a planned transport flight for Admiral Yamamoto. The American forces planned an intercept. This required P-38 fighters to fly extremely low for 600 miles to avoid detection and find Yamamoto's transport. The mission was a success. The American fighters managed to intercept the two bombers and 6 fighters escorting them, and managed to shut down both bombers, with the loss of one P-38 fighter. The G4Ms participated in every major battle on the Pacific: New Guinea, the Solomons, and the Marianas. Beginning March 1945, they started carrying the Yokosuka MXY-7 suicide rockets, but the results with those were very poor, as the slow bomber was an easy target for American fighters, and because of the short range of the rocket, they couldn't release them prematurely. The last mission for these aircraft in the war was to carry the Japanese delegation to Ijishima to negotiate the surrender of Japan on 17th of August 1945. These bombers were cutting edge when they were designed, but restricted by the short-sightedness of the Navy, they carried their faults almost to the end of their service. Nonetheless, they were proof of the ingenuity of the Japanese engineers, and they became one of the most well-known World War II aircraft for a good reason. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.